Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Chinwag, recorded live at the historic Boston Armory. I'm Stephen Asma, and today's episode is about something that fascinates both Paul and me. And somehow, we've managed basically to never do a full episode on it, but today is the day we're diving into werewolves. Yeah, you heard that right. Werewolves. But before we unleash the beast, we want to thank all of you for joining us. Please continue to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Give us the 5 stars if you would. That really helps. Write to us, leave your comments and your suggestions, and share Chinwag with your friends. Your support means a lot to us, and we just want to say thank you very much. Okay, let's get to today's Chinwag. It's all about werewolves, the legends and lore. It's basically some of the strangest theories that we know of about werewolves. We're going to get into that. We might even actually find a were-crocodile. We recorded this one live at the Boston Armory, and if you ever get to Beantown, or if you're living in Beantown, it's a fantastic venue. All right, let's get into it. Werewolves.
Boston. Oh, whoa. We're drifting closer to the sun, Steve.
Wow, that's intense.
Holy cow. The hot lights, man. This is nice to be in Boston.
You must be used to this.
Yeah. Whenever the FBI hauls me in, this is what happens to me. Yeah, this is nice to be here. My dad was from here. My dad was born here. It's nice. And then he was raised in South Hadley, I guess. There we go. Yeah. And so it's nice. It's nice to be here. Nice to wander around. Very nice.
Did he remain, did he come back to Boston a lot?
Sure. He was a big Red Sox fan, and he was, everything was all about Boston. Yeah. Anyway, thank you. Thanks for having us here.
Yeah. Welcome to the Chinwag.
Yep. As always, I want to apologize to actual theremin players all over the world. Even though I do feel like I've got like a green belt in theremin playing at this point.
I think you're nudging up to the brown belt area.
Yeah, I'm getting there. We were talking, maybe I should play the saw sometime.
The saw, the cowbell. We talked about having a whole band of what did we say? Banjo.
Yep, a banjo and a tuba. Maybe,
tuba.
Maybe we can do stuff like that.
The great Scottish instrument.
Yes, we got a bagpipes and a banjo. Oh, Steve, here we are. Well, thank you for coming. We, Steve and I scroll through all kinds of topics and to try to pick a very enjoyable topic for you folks. And we realized recently that we had not talked about a really basic one that we both love.
A crucial monster.
A crucial monster, which is we hadn't talked about werewolves at all.
Yeah. So tonight it's werewolves.
Yeah, werewolves are very interesting. I've kind of been obsessed with werewolves my whole life. I've always wanted to play one. I've never gotten to play one.
You should play a werewolf.
Should I?
Yes, aging. But you're beyond
beat me to it. The middle-aged, chubby werewolf. Kind of
I didn't say that. I just said aging. A dignified.
A very dignified, benevolent werewolf.
Exactly.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned benevolent werewolf. I'm just going to throw this out there before we start, and then we can sort of... In our research, I came across a very interesting werewolf. I think the guy's name was Jan of Thys.
We actually do research.
Thys. Yeah, we do research. I actually have notes. The guy's name was Jan Thys of Livonia, which I guess is sort of now Latvia. At one time was Sweden. And this is sort of the 17th century, I think, which is, as we'll see, this is like the heyday of werewolves. It's sort of like 17th century. But this guy was brought in on another case they suspected him of aiding guys in breaking into a church. He was an old man. He was like 82. And they brought him in. He was like, no, I had nothing to do with breaking into the church. And then he says, but I am a werewolf. He admitted to being a lycanthrope on the stand. And people were like, I'm sorry, you're a werewolf? And he goes, yes. But his whole thing about being a werewolf was that it was a good thing. Werewolves were the agents of God.
Oh.
And that he would gather together with other werewolves in the woods. And they would all get together, and then they would cross, he would call it, we would cross the ocean to hell, where we would battle demons and witches to steal back all the grain and food they'd stolen to ensure a good harvest.
Whoa.
And he was like, so so his idea was that werewolves were good guys.
That is not the standard view. It
is not.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking I could do the Jan Thys biopic. Jan Thys of Livonia. Fortunately, I think his defense did not work, and they still beat him and banished him from town. But it didn't go over well. But it's interesting you say like a good guy werewolf, because this was a good guy werewolf.
I've heard of the werewolf being basically like in cahoots with the devil, and so oftentimes they were equated with witches, and they were accused of witchcraft. And then I've also heard of like what I would call sort of the liberal version of the werewolf, and I mean liberal small L here, which is they're kind of a victim. They got bit. The old version was you could just be looked at by a wolf, and that could turn you in.
No, and that's actually Jan Thys of Livonia actually said.
Oh, really?
He got cursed with being a guy toasted him and cursed him with being a werewolf, and then that's how he got to be. And then he had the power to toast people and turn them into werewolves.
Well, that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. No, Steve, you're absolutely right. That makes perfect sense.
You will hear totally unreliable facts tonight. Like no one will be better off after this evening. Like you will not have learned anything real. No, but we did do some research. I'm going to offer a provisional definition of a werewolf, and then we can do a little bit of history here. Here's my definition, and maybe you'll take issue with this, but I would say, because the werewolf appears all over the planet. There's were-bears, were-crocodiles, different, creatures.
Well, there's the idea you can turn into any animal.
Yeah.
Everywhere in the world has a version of werewolves.
Right.
Werewolves seem to be, a lot of it seems to be Western Europe.
Yes, I think that's right.
North America,
certainly
too,
wolves, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's basically a shapeshifter, wouldn't you say? It's a shapeshifter, and it's a way in which the human becomes partly like a hybrid with another animal. And it's worse than just a wolf, I think, because the werewolf has some reason, some human reason, and some like human greed. So that makes them worse than a wolf because they don't.
Right,
they're not
the human element
yeah,
to them.
They're
right.
worse. Yeah,
that's interesting. No, I think that makes sense as a definition of all these animals and stuff. I think in other traditions it means a different thing sometimes to turn into the animal, but definitely for Western Europe with wolves. And then the whole thing goes on to become very much a sort of like metaphor for just the kind of rage in a person and the sort of like
the id.
That kind of thing. I mean, I think that definitely becomes interesting. When I was interested in the word lycanthropy, which I always think means just turning into a wolf. I don't know if then or now, but it means any animal now, technically. Which I have something later I want to read, which is about
some weird animal story.
But it can mean any animal now.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, what does the werewolf mean? It could mean that you have some like id or some aggression in you, and you're going back. It's almost like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Right. But I've seen it could be also like an allegory for puberty, like
really?
Because you grow hair, you feel grotesque.
Oh, that's true.
You feel lust in a way that you didn't before.
That's interesting. That makes a lot of sense, actually. And in a lot of the cases that you read about, they're often young people, which is why, again, I don't mean to keep bringing up Jan Thys of Livonia.
Let's spend the whole night on
I think he's my favorite werewolf. And he was an old man, which was very unusual. But a lot of the time, they're sort of 14-year-old boys and stuff.
Is that right?
Well,
see, that's my.
You're right. And what is it? Hypertricosis? Is that the?
Hypertricosis is when you like, have you ever seen, it used to be like in the carnivals and the sideshows, there'd be like Jojo the dog-faced boy with like hair all over the face, you know what I'm talking about? Kind of a Barnum character.
Yeah.
That was oftentimes thought to be like a werewolf, but it's really just, it's not the hair from your head. It's like every human being has this fuzz that's on all over your body when you're inside your mother. Did you guys know this? Yeah. And what happens?
You're covered with hair when you're in the womb?
And you shed it right before you're born, and you eat it inside the womb, and that becomes your first bowel movement. I am not kidding you.
Wait a minute, wait.
Yes.
Wait.
You ate the hair on your body, just like the rest of us did.
Wait. So you're covered with this weird fine hair in the womb.
Yeah.
You eat it off of your own body right before.
It sheds, and it.
Oh, you shed, and then
eat
you're
it.
like, oh,
Yeah.
What'd you say? The first bowel movement?
Because it's the first thing you've eaten. When you are born, those of you who are parents, you'll remember this. There's this horrifying first bowel movement your baby takes. You're like, what is going on?
I thought that stuff was amazing looking, actually. It's called meconium, the stuff that they first,
Yes.
right? And a lot of it, they expel a lot of minerals and stuff and it's like shiny and it's beautiful.
Yeah, we've got photos.
Steve, it's a beautiful thing when the baby takes its first crap, Steve. It's a beautiful thing. It's not bad. That's interesting. I did not know this about so some hypertrichosis is that people are born still with the hair on them.
Yeah, it never sheds off of them, and it just keeps growing. That's a rare case, but that is one of the cases.
I was amazed to see there's all different kinds of hypertrichosis. Then you grow it excessively when you're out, and it's localized. Sometimes you only grow it in one place.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is why you have people who have just on their faces. They don't necessarily have it everywhere else. Or you get it all over your body and stuff like that. So I think that there's some thinking, and there's other explanations, I think, other syndromes that affect people's sort of language centers and things, so they can't really speak. So there's this idea that, you're an animal because you can't speak, and things like that. This is all retroactive that people are sort of putting that stuff.
No, it must have been terrible to have this at a time when there wasn't good medicine, and it was been like you're cursed or you're a werewolf. That must have been common.
Yeah, no, for sure. It was interesting to go back and see how far back it goes in sort of human history. And you get it, I think the Babylonians had some ideas of at least changing into an animal.
Yeah.
Or if not necessarily
the wild man.
Wild man. Yeah.
In Gilgamesh, there's a wild man.
I guess there's a wild man in that. His buddy. Gilgamesh has a buddy named Enkidu.
Yes, Enkidu, right.
And
exactly.
Enkidu's a wild man. And he's covered in hair. And he's sort of the representation of Gilgamesh's sort of id.
Yeah,
because he's a little bit like he runs around and he's always kind of lusty and hungry and shit and stuff like that. And so he's a little bit that representation of that for Gilgamesh.
What's weird
is like
though,
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And you realize how much Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is just a werewolf thing or an animal transformation thing.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
And that's like probably in the 1890s or something. Is that when
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? I think so, yeah.
That's like peak Freud time, right? So
the
idea that you have an animal inside you, all of us do, and then you've learned to repress it.
Right.
And then, but under certain conditions like alcohol and certain potions and the full moon, then it'll come out and run around rampant.
There was a case that Freud had that was called the Wolfman.
Oh, that's right.
Right?
Yes.
I don't know what the hell. I suppose that guy thought he was a wolf. I guess that was.
Yes, I think I don't know that case very well, but I think you're right.
Neither do I. So that was the whole thing there. But it was interesting because I guess then the first werewolf is this Greek king, Lycoan.
Yeah.
Who was a cannibal, I guess, and
Zeus
came down to sort of check out and see if he really was a cannibal. And the guy ended up feeding Zeus a child baked in a pie.
So Greek. Such a Greek.
And Zeus, and I think Zeus cursed him then to be a wolf.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, and all of his progeny were going to be wolves.
He tried to trick Zeus by feeding him his son.
Dumb fuck.
Yeah,
How stupid is that?
You cannot trick Zeus.
Yeah, he tried to feed him his own son. I think that's right. Yeah.
It's a cheery little story.
It's a very cheery story. There's a lot of that stuff early on in different mythological.
There's one story that Pliny tells. This is like in Rome, and he's like around the same time as Ovid and Virgil. And Pliny says the Greeks will believe anything. This is the guy, by the way, that believes all kinds of crazy shit.
He believed all the crazy people have
But he's like, these Greeks, they think that you can, and he tells a story that a guy will go to this special magical lake. He'll take his clothes off and hang them on a tree. And then he swims through the lake, and when he gets to the other side, he becomes a wolf. If he can stay away from human beings for 9 years, then he can swim back across the river and turn back into a man, and he gets his clothes back, too. And that's the thing that Pliny was like, this is bullshit. How does he get his clothes back?
I call bullshit on that. And you're right, Pliny believed all kinds of shit that's like, weird stuff about animals that makes no sense and stuff like that. Yeah,
eels that are like 30 feet long and
yeah,
stuff.
and unicorns and shit, basically.
Yeah.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, and there's interestingly, again, there's all kinds of, I discovered a word that I'd never heard, which is, I mean, again, it's a different animal, but boanthropy.
Boanthropy?
Boanthropy, which I guess is bovine anthropy, because I guess in a lot of traditions, there's people turning into cows. and now in the Bible, I think King Nebuchadnezzar, in the book of Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar is, I don't think he's the guy with the writing on the wall, but one of those in the book of Daniel. I don't think it's that, but Daniel's a prophet, and they hold him prisoner, and Nebuchadnezzar has a dream that he's sort of wandering around eating grass and stuff, and he goes to Daniel to say, interpret the dream, and Daniel's like, pretty clear, you're going to turn into a beast, and he's cursed by God, and he walks on all fours and eats grass, and he thinks he's a cow. And that was, and then I realized that, and then I was reading about it, there's all these traditions of.
There's modern versions of people who think
not
they're
modern
cows?
so much, but there's in the older traditions. There's in Persia, there's a story of a king turning into a cow.
Wow.
Or thinking he's a cow. And there's a thing in Armenia. There's the whole idea of Christianity coming to Armenia is because this king thought he was a boar, not a cow. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He thought he was turning into a boar and stuff like that, not a cow. But I mean, it's really interesting.
A cow would not be threatening at all, but a boar would be.
Yeah, a boar would be threatening.
Boars are mean and violent.
Yep. And
tough.
he was cured by this Christian saint, and so he accepted Christianity and stuff like that. And I guess in the Norse mythology, you had berserkers.
Oh, like the Vikings, the berserkers?
Yeah, they had, and they would change into, you would wear the skin of an animal. How the fuck do I know all of this?
yeah, right.
I mean, I'm sitting here talking authoritatively about this, like I know what the fuck I'm talking about. And I kind of do, actually, but it's like, I think one of the ways of turning into an animal was to wear the skin of that animal.
Oh, you wear the skin.
Yeah.
And then that turns you into a wolf.
Yeah.
And then you can do more damage on your enemy because you're more like an animal. Is that the idea?
I guess that's the idea.
You're whipping yourself up into
it. And I think the berserkers would wear a bear skin. And I think,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And berserker is some kind of bear is somewhere in the word berserker. So I guess they would turn into bears.
I mean, that's what athletes do. Like you ramp yourself up so that you'll be like less. I mean, it's part of the attraction of a werewolf is you're not confined by the law or morality, and you're not civilized anymore. You've become something less than human, and that's what football players do. Baseball players not so much, but football players ramp themselves up. Hockey players, Jesus.
Yeah, tennis players not so much.
Yeah, tennis.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah, no, so it's like an aggression metaphor. Yeah. It's a metaphor for kind of particular. The other thing I thought was interesting in reading about some of this stuff, really early on stuff, is the line between a werewolf and a vampire and all these things was very similar.
Yeah.
Like vampires a long time ago aren't anything like they became.
They weren't debonair.
No.
Right, they were.
That's later, right? That's sort of 19th century. That's like Dracula and Bram Stoker.
Yeah, Bram Stoker, I think.
But a long time ago, they seemed to be almost indistinguishable.
From werewolves?
Kind of.
Yeah, I think you're right.
They were just a kind of creepy person who was running around, attacking people, and they needed to be sort of handled and killed and buried out at a crossroads and stuff, which is weird, So I don't know why vampires...
There's one case I know of, which is the Peter Stump case. I think you looked at this a little bit too, right? In our research, we have archives and we cross-check. But Peter Stump was 1590, and there was like a pamphlet that came out that said, the pamphlet was called The Damnable Life and Death of Peter Stump. And this guy was accused of, well, first what happened in Bedburg, Germany is there were like mutilated animals showing up, and then mutilated humans. And he fell under suspicion because he had one hand. And the theory emerged that he had bitten off his other hand when he was a wolf and it was in a trap. And in order to get out of the trap, he bitten off his hand. So they bring him in and they start torturing him. And you know how it is under torture.
Sure.
You're
I'm an actor. I know what that's like.
That's like. You'll admit to anything. So he admits that he's been devil worshiping for years, and that the devil gave him a belt called the Devil's Girdle, and the devil's girdle would turn him into a wolf.
The devil's girdle. Okay.
The devil's girdle would turn him into a wolf, and then he admitted to killing 14 kids. And they tortured and decapitated him.
Yeah.
But one theory is that he was a serial killer.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what a serial killer was, so they just thought, okay, that's a werewolf. The other theory is he was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
As a regular dude.
It's interesting. A lot of those things, though, I can't. Yeah, I mean, there's this sense that they're serial killers or something, but it's also hard to tell when you read these things how much legend has come into it. And then it's also like, did they have anything to do with this stuff at all?
Yeah, it could have been just walking down the road.
Because a lot of the time it seems like it's sort of the marginal people. It's marginalized people in a particular place. It's the guys who are not, they're the sort of indigent and marginal, or they have something.
I remember the Wolfman was like this.
Yeah, he is. Sure, yeah. No, and it's like somebody who's shut out, sort of, I mean, we've talked about this a lot. I mean, we did this whole episode about cryptids, and I talked about these melon head people.
Oh, yeah.
In New Haven, in Connecticut.
You guys heard the melon heads?
Have you heard of the melon heads? Yeah, and where I'm from in New Haven, that's like melon head country. And and they're similar, though, because it's similar, this kind of othering thing that seems sort of like, I'm going to blame all this shit on you. And I'm going to find the person who doesn't fit in for any number of reasons and blame it on you. Because it often seems like that to me.
Yeah, and you could say these people are barbaric. They're not like us. This is constantly, so they're more like an animal. So you'll see the wolfman or the werewolf is associated with people who aren't part of the community.
Yeah.
And so it's turned into kind of like ethnocentrism thing. It happens a lot.
And a lot of it too then attaches to like, because there were some I read, there was one that I read about a kid in Estonia, and this was interesting to me. This is actually something I learned about 10 years ago that surprised me. The Crusades, basically, they're sending guys to the Holy Land. I never knew that there was a Northern Crusade. Did you know this?
I don't think I did.
That they sent a bunch of people north into the Baltic and Sweden and Russia, what's now Russia and what's now Sweden, because they were pagan way the hell after everybody else had converted to Christianity. And they stayed. There was a lot of paganism that stayed. And a lot of these stories also involve these people who are doing more like folk magic and pagan shit and stuff like that.
Like it wasn't black magic. It was just like part of their religion.
Just like,
or whatever.
Or somebody who's like, so again, it's like the witch trial stuff. It starts to sort of blend into that stuff too. But the other thing it reminds me of too, and actually that guy just died, that psychiatrist, Bennett Braun, the guy who, there was a whole satanic panic in the 80s.
Oh,
you guys remember that whole thing?
Panic?
With the whole sort of like, yeah, and the guy who was the psychiatrist, what happened? Somebody down there was part of the satanic panic? Were you really?
You can tell, just look at him.
I know, look at you. Were you really? Did you have to go through, were you really like sort of therapized for that?
I was afraid of being possessed.
You were afraid of being possessed. And was that because somebody had suggested to you was this your religious upbringing? Or was it?
Because I was an altar boy.
So Catholics in general.
That explains that, yeah. So, the Catholics. No, but that guy, the psychiatrist who was sort of the lead psychiatrist in that whole sort of wave of panics just died. Did you see this?
Yeah.
And he was up. Yeah, exactly.
Agreed.
Totally. Good riddance.
He was a whack
He was a real lunatic. But it's interesting when you say that a lot of these guys would confess to stuff that they probably didn't do.
They didn't do it.
And certainly they weren't werewolves. I mean,
under torture, for sure, you would confess. But then also, somebody can just get in your head and make you think you were like running around, eating people, because the mind is so susceptible to suggestion.
That's what's crazy about the satanic panic thing.
Yeah.
Is that, and I suppose you had an authority figure sitting there going like, yes.
Yeah, with a white coat on.
Yeah, this shit actually happened to you, and just admit it. Then it's like you're really going to go with it. It's crazy. It's that imagination run rampant thing.
It is.
That it's like it can all run away with you. There's another interesting werewolf case I thought was really weird. And this was about, I can't remember what the fuck this was called. Excuse me, let me consult my notes there. My extensive notes. The Wolf of Ansbach in 17th century Bavaria. I thought this was interesting.
I haven't heard of this one.
This is actually interesting because it's an example of like your imagination running away with you. So there was somebody was killing things, sheep, and attacking people, and they decided it was a werewolf. They decided it was the resurrected spirit body of this hated sort of burgermeister or something, or some magistrate. Everybody hated this fucking guy, so they were like, he's back, and he's fucking with everything. And so they were like, that's what it is. It's a werewolf. It was an actual wolf, is what it turned out to be, and it kept attacking things. And they went out and they finally killed it. It didn't turn back into a guy. And that didn't turn back into a guy. This is amazing. And they were like, it's still a werewolf. They were like, it's definitely still a werewolf. So what they did is they took the body of the wolf, they cut its muzzle off.
What?
They put a wig and a beard on it.
Oh, come on.
They dressed it in the guy's clothes, and they paraded it around the town.
Holy shit.
And they hung it at a gibbet, which you would do to a human being.
Oh, my God.
Because they would not admit it wasn't a werewolf.
That it wasn't a werewolf.
Isn't that fucking nuts? And it's such a bizarre story.
That is totally bizarre.
And it's that thing, but there you go, where it's just like...
The imagination, like...
Totally out of control.
Them. Yeah.
And you can't admit that the crazy thing is happening.
Yeah.
Right in front of you. You know it's not a werewolf, it's a wolf, and they wouldn't admit it.
Well, it is true that, like, wherever you find a were creature, it is tied to the local predator. And it turns out that wolves just dominate the whole northern hemisphere.
Right.
But if you look at, in Indonesia, it's a were-crocodile. And you were telling me something about a were-shark. What's the were-shark?
In Hawaii, apparently, there's a whole folklore. Now, seriously. In Hawaii, I'm not making this up. Believe it or not, I'm making this up. There's a whole shark god thing in Hawaii. I should know more. I should know. God, I should know more.
You check your notes.
No, it's not in my notes, man. I'm pulling this out of my head, man. There's a were-shark thing. People who turn into sharks. Yes, you can find it in any. It is that thing of any sort of tradition.
Yeah.
Has something. And I was reading about in East Africa. There's no wolves, but there's hyenas, and hyenas are real scavengers, and so the were-hyena thing is really big in East Africa, and that it's very deliberately used to other people, your enemies.
Oh, really?
Like very deliberately. You're like, that other town is like just full of were-hyenas. Yeah.
Wow.
All you people are scavengers. All you people are like a lower form of life.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. Like, what makes you civilized is like bound up in the werewolf story, because like the barbarians would be. I mean, the Greeks thought anybody who didn't speak Greek was barbarian.
Right.
That's where the word comes from. Like, they thought it all sounded like bar, 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 bar.
They were making fun of how people talked.
Yeah, they're making fun of how everybody else talked.
Yeah.
But people do that now, too. They'll say, like, oh, those people are more like an animal. They're not as evolved. That was a big thing after Darwin. Like, so they're more like, a wolf, or more like an animal. There's a great line that, here we go. This is, Freud says, in Latin, homo homini lupus, which is human beings are wolves to other human beings.
Right.
They shouldn't be trusted. They're awful.
Yeah.
Anyway, good night.
It's kind of true, though. But it works as a metaphor for all of that kind of stuff. And there were cases in the 19th century I was reading about of people using lycanthropy as a defense.
Oh.
And these guys are basically serial killers. Oh. And it was, and oh, it's so funny. Why am I laughing about this?
Yeah, what?
No, but I'm remembering one of these cases in Spain, and there was a guy who was a serial killer, essentially, and he was and he really was, this is sort of 1840s or something, and he was luring people in and killing them, and he was definitely, it wasn't, and they put him on trial, and he pleaded lycanthropy, and then to prove that he wasn't to prove that he wasn't a werewolf, they applied phrenology to him. So they felt
good science.
Instead of buying that he's a werewolf, they're like, I know how we'll prove this. We'll go to the ultimate pseudoscience and check your skull. And so they checked his skull and they determined he was a liar because of the shape of his skull. And so that was it for that guy. And that's how they condemned him. Yeah, they
didn't check his teeth or anything.
No, they didn't check his teeth. They didn't do any of that stuff. They didn't check any of that stuff.
One thing that's interesting is, we've talked about this before, but my mom was a psychiatric nurse for like 30 years. And so she would work on the ward of the hospital. And she said that when the full moon came, there were way more admissions like way more people were admitted into the
Yeah,
hospital.
I
And there
suppose-
appears to be some correlation between the lycanthropy folks and the full moon. What do you make of
just
that?
violent behavior in general and stuff, right? Or I mean, definitely the werewolf thing attaches to it for sure.
Yeah, but I think other mental illnesses get sort of triggered somehow.
Do they?
Well, that's according to my mom, and I believe everything my mom tells me.
All right, listen. I believe your mother. I mean, more than I believe me or anybody else. But yeah, for sure that you hear that about
Yeah.
sort of the sort of psych wards of places go more intense. I don't. What is that? What do you think
I
it
read
is?
one scientific paper on this.
Okay.
You guys have heard this, right? That the full moon, it's classic folklore. But one scientific paper, a lot of people just dismiss it like it's just silly, don't believe it. But this one paper was saying there might be some receptor in the brain that reads like geoelectrical or geomagnetic changes that are very subtle that have to do with the moon. And it has not yet been discovered. But we shouldn't rule it out.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's not exactly scientific, but it's holding the door
That's
open.
really
Yes,
scientific.
it's holding the door
Yeah,
open.
well, I suppose so. The Higgs boson, that guy said that
right,
exists,
that
and they
guy.
found it. Yeah.
Well, your cat. Okay, Paul's a cat person.
I am a cat.
Yeah. How many cats do you have?
What's that?
How many cats do you have?
I have 3 now.
Have you ever seen your cat like stand there and open its mouth and just go like this? Have you guys seen this?
It's an uncanny depiction of a cat with its mouth open, Steve. It's uncanny.
I'm not the actor. You're the actor. You're the actor.
Do you mean when they only just stand there and do that? It's nothing
Yeah,
like
they just open their
thing
they
they
just
do
open
like
their
that.
mouth, and it's like they're reading the room. They
Yes.
have an organ called the Jacobson organ at the top of their mouth. I'm not kidding.
You're
I'm not
making
no,
this
I'm not
shit
making this up. And they are bringing in like pheromones and smells that you can't smell into that Jacobson organ, and it's telling them shit that you and I can't understand. But humans may have like a very rudimentary one that's left over that we've evolved beyond.
so that, and potentially, is this why they can like anticipate
Yeah.
earthquakes and stuff like
Well, I
that?
don't know about that.
All right, we don't
But
know
for
about
the
that.
purposes of
so
this
the
conversation,
Jacobson
yes.
organ is useless for an earthquake. Okay, we can establish
Everything
that.
but an earthquake.
I'd never heard any of this. Why do they do the thing when they go like, when they see a bird and stuff like that?
I do
Like,
not know.
Why are they?
Are they trying to draw it in? Like,
Now, that was good, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was uncanny.
He's the actor.
Yeah. Why? That freaks me out when they do that. Like, why are they
Yeah.
doing that? It's so freaky.
I thought they were trying to draw in their prey.
Like the sound or something.
That's how I interpret it. Hey,
Why
there's going
would
to be a question and answer section, so
Yeah.
maybe somebody can step up later.
Maybe
and tell
somebody
us.
knows. Yeah,
Yeah.
if somebody else knows, well, come up and tell us afterwards. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, in
Yeah.
a second. Hold on. Steady. Easy, cowboy.
Steady on.
Steady. But we definitely I want to hear like what it is. I definitely want to hear what it is. Cats are so fucking weird. I mean, they're always doing such strange things. But I had no idea. I didn't know that that's what that was.
Yeah.
Glad to know it. What do you got there? You got something else?
Okay, I've
there?
got a couple other allegories to run by you. We've got, we've said that werewolves are maybe an allegory of the inner aggression, and we said puberty, and we've suggested mental illness, but also a really good allegory of addiction. Right? Because
Oh,
if you think
interesting,
about
really.
remember the Wolfman movie with Lon Chaney Jr.?
I love that.
And
movie.
apparently Lon had trouble with the drink, as they say.
He did. He was he had
Yeah.
a definite drinking problem.
And
which
I
really
feel like
affected
it's
his-
a good metaphor for addiction. Not good in the sense, but it's accurate. Like you feel it coming on, you don't want to do
interesting.
it, it overtakes you,
That's
you do
interesting.
stuff, and then you regret it afterwards.
Interesting. Isn't a vampire also a pretty good one for that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'd never thought of werewolves being. I
Yeah.
always think like vampires are the ones that sort of really like. But that's true. I've never thought of that. Yeah, Lon Chaney. You've seen that movie? You guys ever seen The Wolfman?
Classic.
1940. Oh my God, I love that movie so much.
You need to do a remake of that film.
They did a terrible remake
I know,
of it.
but
yeah.
that's where you
They
step
did a
in.
terrible remake of it. It was so bad. But I can't.
The one with Anthony Hopkins?
I would have to play the Claude Rains. Anthony Hopkins was great in that movie.
Yeah, he was great.
He was really great in it.
It had potential. What went wrong in that film?
Everything.
Everything.
Yeah. I mean, it should have been good because
Yeah.
what's his name would have been
He's
Benicio del
fantastic
Toro.
too,
Is
yeah,
fantastic.
Del Toro.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I don't know. It just didn't. It was kind of cheesy and didn't too many.
Is
Yeah,
that
I was
it?
just going to
CGI?
say. I was just going to say it was the special effects.
Yeah.
were so- and that's interesting. Like, God, there's some great werewolf, like American Werewolf in London.
Yeah.
With that whole amazing transformation.
Yeah, that's Rick Baker, right?
What's that?
Ricky Baker?
That's Rick Baker. Yeah, that's Rick Baker. And
didn't he work on you?
I did. He did the Planet of the Apes thing. And but I've been obsessed with the whole idea of changing into an animal since I was a little kid. And I think it has a lot to do with my then wanting to be an actor. There's some basic thing of like just changing into something else. Big time.
That's what you do for a living, is shapeshifting.
I do. Yeah. I'm a shapeshifter, Steve.
That's true.
That's what. From now on, I'm going to describe myself as that. I'm not an actor. I'm a shapeshifter.
Shapeshifter, professional.
I'm a shaman. But I was obsessed with that. And Lon Chaney, I remember being really struck by Lon Chaney as a kid because he seemed like a very sad man.
Yeah.
And he was a very sad man. I think he was a better actor than he ever really
I thought he was good.
Manifested. He could be really great. He's great in that movie.
I heard that he is the only guy that played the same monster through all the Universal films.
That's true.
Which is
he
cool.
played all of them, didn't he? He played
there were 3 of them, maybe.
Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy.
But I mean, he also played. He was the only guy to play the Wolfman in all those Universal films.
Oh,
yeah. But he did play the other monsters too.
He played all the other ones, I think. He played Dracula, which
Yeah.
was a little weird having him play Dracula. But I think it's called Son of Dracula.
He doesn't have the right head for Dracula.
Not really, but he's not bad in it. He's not bad in it though. That's interesting. Oh, so he always played the Wolfman.
Yeah,
Did he?
apparently.
You sure about that?
I read it on Wikipedia.
Are you sure? I think Bela Lugosi.
That's the kind of research we're doing.
Yeah, that's the kind of. I think Bela Lugosi may have played the Wolfman at one point.
Somebody, when you stand up,
Yeah,
can come
no,
to the
that guy.
question.
Well, hold on, maybe that guy knows. No, there's all kinds of interesting. It's also there's the whole. I know you're interested in this. There's another sort of relative of the Wolfman, or sort of explanation of the Wolfman as the wild child or the feral children thing, of which there's several examples through history and probably even fairly recent ones, right?
Yeah.
Which is these children found wandering around who have supposedly been raised by some kind of animal.
Yeah.
Right? And there's the kid in India that they think is the inspiration for all the Jungle books.
Oh, yeah, from Mowgli
like
or whatever.
Yeah. And there's an example of
He
that.
was living in a cave, I think.
Yep. And then raised by wolves.
Yeah.
He was supposedly raised by wolves, this kid. And again, who knows what the deal is with this kid? Who knows?
You see it, though. Animals will take each other on. It's rare, but they will, like a cross species, raise another animal.
Were they really?
Yeah. It's rare, but it happens. And
it really could happen with a human child, that they would maybe...
I've seen, like, there's a famous... I know someone's like, not a human.
That person, yeah.
But there's a famous case of a mother chimp that raised a kitten, and like she even
Raised a kitten?
Trimmed the nails of the kitten so it wouldn't scratch her. I know there are these cases. They're just weird.
Interesting.
But Caspar Hauser might be the most famous feral child.
Caspar Hauser's a really famous one, and I guess he's sort of a wild child. And there were all kinds of strange theories about him. He was sort of found, and then there was a whole theory that he was like royalty.
Yeah, he might have been
like
a scam of some kind.
Yeah, or something. And then he just disappeared.
But you find a kid like just wandering in the woods, and they're just all filthy, and then they can't speak the language, and it happens.
Yeah, no, I can remember there's one, it was a woman, and it's like the 17th century or something, and a woman who was young woman found wandering around wearing sort of animal skins and stuff, and she spoke gibberish and stuff like this, and they eventually took her in and civilized her and taught her French or whatever the hell it was they were speaking. And and a lot of the times when you read these stories, they end up putting these people in convents or monasteries.
Oh, God.
It's interesting.
More cruel than the forest.
Much worse. Much worse. I'd much rather live out in the woods. But this woman, I think, eventually when she could communicate with people, told them a whole elaborate story of being taken captive and enslaved, and that she was actually an indigenous person of North America.
Oh, really?
I can't remember what this case is, but it is one you can look at. I can't remember what the woman's name was.
She was brought back across the
Somebody
ocean.
brought her over
from
America.
I'm sure it happened.
Yeah, it does sound totally plausible. But again, it's that thing of these deeply disenfranchised human beings being sort of having this thing put on them.
That totally reminds me that when Darwin went on the Beagle and they went all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, they thought, oh, these people are like animals. I mean, these are guys.
That's all the way down at the bottom.
Yeah,
of
the bottom of South
Chile,
America.
right?
Yeah,
yeah.
But they took two people, natives. I know one of them was named Jem, and they brought them back to England, and they tried to civilize them by teaching them English. And they actually they learned the language, and they worked as like servants in like bourgeois households.
Jesus Christ.
It's so terrible. But they wanted to go back home. And then when they brought them home, I think they couldn't, like, they dropped them off, and like one of them was dead within like 6 months. It was just a disaster
all
in every
that
way.
horrible stuff of people being taken and displayed as wild people and stuff and dying. I mean, dying in captivity is just horrible. All that kind of stuff.
If you think about Rome is based on this weird folklore about Romulus and Remus, right?
Yeah.
And they're like feral children.
They are.
And they end up suckling with the she-wolf. And
or she-wolf raises them. I don't know how
that's
they ended up with it.
the weirdest story. Like,
it is a weird story, but that's the origin of like Rome and stuff like that. And then one of them kills the other. I can't remember.
Romulus kills Remus, and that starts Rome.
Yeah, and then it's Rome. I mean, the whole thing comes from a wolf like that.
That's bizarre.
It is bizarre. It's super bizarre. But how far back it goes is really interesting. The Romans really had a thing about it. And there was a whole thing about you couldn't drink. This I love. You shouldn't drink water out of a wolf's footprint, or you'll turn a wolf. And I'm like, who the fuck would be like,
who's planning on doing that?
Who's just gonna be like, you know what? I'm just gonna I mean, it's just like completely crazy. The Romans had a real thing about it, and the werewolves pop up in a lot of stuff. In the Satyricon, there's werewolves and stuff like that.
Well, they loved shapeshifters. They loved hybrid creatures of all. The Greeks did, and the Romans loved it. And
why? What's the deal with that? Why?
I mean, one theory could be that it's a way for them to think about the city and rationality and civilization versus emotions and the forest and being wild. But also there's something about hybrid stories that really stick. They'll call it like a sticky meme. So if you tell a story about like a dude who just went down and fought somebody, that's not as cool as he fought somebody that was part wolf and part part snake and part octopus.
Right.
That really sticks in your head.
It sure does.
And then the idea is that then you spread the story. So that's why Greek mythology has all these hybrids, is that it unifies people because it becomes like sticky memes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
It is a really catchy idea of people being
you can't get it out of your head.
Multiplied or something like that. That's fascinating. I was interested in some of the like folklore of it and chasing down some of the folklore and, the moon. It makes sense also because wolves are nocturnal and stuff. But I was really curious about the silver bullet.
Oh, yeah. What's up with the silver bullet?
And I was kind of like, and I was under the impression that the dude who directed The Wolfman, whose name I think was Robert Siodmak, he I think claimed he just made it up.
Oh.
He was like, but he didn't. Because I in my researches, Steve, I found that actually there's all kinds of ideas of people. If you bonk a werewolf over the head with any piece of metal, apparently it works. But what I found that was kind of cool, yes, any piece of metal. But I found a really cool story about something called the Beast of Gévaudan, which was this wolf or creature. I'd never heard of this. This is bananas.
I've never heard of that.
In France in the 1760s, there was a creature attacking animals and people. It was a beast of a tawny russet color with dark streaks and stripes down its back, a tail longer than a wolf's, ending in a tuft, according to eyewitnesses. They didn't know what this thing was, but apparently it became a huge sensation in France. And it went all the way up to the king.
Really?
Louis XV was offering all of this
like
reward
rewards
money
to kill
and
it?
sending guys out, hunters out to find this thing. Because it killed apparently like a couple of hundred people.
Holy
And it apparently
shit.
killed a lot of livestock. Now, again, it's one of these things where I'm like, is this true?
Right.
Or is it all legendized?
Right.
Does
Or
it
it could be a small truth that's then
that then gets really built up and gets out of
extrapolated or
hand.
whatever.
But the guy at one point they thought they'd killed it, and then it kept coming back, and it was like nobody could control the fucking thing. But a guy, a great hunter named Jean Chastel, that's his name, he had a rifle that apparently was loaded with silver metal bullets.
Oh.
But they think that it's a mistranslation later, that what he had were the silver metals. It was made from the silver metals, the holy metals around his neck.
Oh.
That he had bullets made of that. And that's the origin of silver bullets being the whole idea.
Really?
So it's from this crazy fucking thing.
Oh,
And he
that's
killed the
bizarre.
thing finally.
He did.
And nobody could identify what kind of animal it was. So they took it back to Paris, but it had become so desiccated at that point, nobody could tell what it was anymore. So nobody really knows what the hell this thing was that was killing things. It was this crazy looking, like,
It looked sort of wolfish, but it was bigger?
I guess so, yeah. It seemed to be bigger. And there's all kinds of crazy theories about what it was, but
There are these cases where like an animal just has a weird growth pattern, like acromegaly, like it just gets way bigger than
animals can
normal.
have that kind of
Yeah, they
thing?
can get it. I mean, human beings get it. Like Charles O'Brien was like the biggest human being, and he had this. And I remember the scientists were like, "We can't wait to get your skeleton," and he was like, "No, you don't." and then he paid these guys to take his body out and dump it into the ocean so that the scientists couldn't get it. And then the scientists, they counter bribed the guys in the boats, so they were able to get the guy's body.
Holy cow.
And you can see his
He's
skeleton.
the Irish giant, right?
The
Is
Irish
that what they're
giant.
called?
Yeah, you can see him in London at the Hunterian Museum.
Really?
Yeah.
They finally got his skeleton.
The skeleton's there.
Good for them. Excellent.
Good for science.
Yeah, great. Another triumph for science. Fantastic. Speaking of science, should I read the one thing? Should we close with the thing before we do questions?
Yes.
We chose with the strange case that I found.
Yes, please.
I was interested to find that there is a clinical form of lycanthropy now that it is a diagnosis that you can be given.
Very rare.
Very, very rare. But I did find a rare report of clinical lycanthropy and obsessive compulsive and related disorders. Lycanthropy is a rare variant of a delusional misidentification syndrome, specifically reverse intermetamorphosis, where patients believe that they're experiencing transformation. What the hell does reverse intermetamorphosis mean?
If you don't know, I can't explain it to
Okay,
you,
I just don't know what that means. But this is an interesting case. There was a case I remember of a guy in Miami who was found on a highway off-ramp eating another guy. Do you remember this a few years ago?
Oh, my God.
Do you remember this? I was
Chinwag
fucking obsessed
proceeds.
with this. And he pleaded that he was diagnosed as having lycanthropy.
Really?
Because he thought he was a wolf.
Oh, my God.
Anyway, the patient, this is the case presentation. I just thought this was kind of wild. The patient's a 25-year-old milkman residing in an urban area.
It's already good.
The milkman. Patient was brought to the Department of Psychiatry by family members with complaints of excessive hand washing, irritable behavior, and decreased sleep, along with recurrent cleaning of genital areas and acting like a buffalo for 4 months. During an interview with the patient, who reported engaging in sexual activity with a buffalo.
No.
A few times 6 months in the past, and he believes that a few cells of the buffalo have entered his body and he is turning into a buffalo. To avoid this, he recurrently washes his hands and genitals. Gradually, his belief strengthened. He was convinced he'd become a buffalo due to his bestiality. Along with this, his obsession with contamination, compulsive hand washing continued. About 2 months after the act of bestiality, he started believing his body had transformed into a buffalo, beginning with his lower half towards his torso and face.
Oh, my God.
Isn't that crazy?
That's
so it's an
insane.
actual condition still. It's a thing that people still think is happening to them.
On that note, we just
See, thank you. Kind of incredible, isn't it? Kind of incredible.
Boy, that was a fun one. Thank you to everyone in Boston who came out. And make sure to tune into the bonus episode, as we'll be sharing the audience Q&A from the Boston Armory. And you do not want to miss the Q&A. Those are always quite chaotic in the best way possible. And as always, everybody, wag on weirdos. Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films, hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Original theme music by Luke Top, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Audio production supervision by Jared Brom and Matt Dyson. Editing and mixing by Jeff Neal. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Research assistance by Aidan Brooks. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.